Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And as I'm recording this on Mother's Day, and it's a few days after Mother's Day if you're listening to this, I just want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the wonderful moms out there, especially my own mom and other moms I know, Christy, Rebecca, all the moms out there. We love you. We appreciate you. Couldn't do this without you. So, speaking of out there, this week I wanted to do another show on one of my favorite topics, which is UFOs. I don't do enough shows on them. We've done a few. I'll link to them in the comments below, but I don't really talk about UFOs enough. I feel for me, it's a subject I used to be really interested in, and then over the years, my interests have shifted more to like ghost hunting, and then more recently to Bigfoot, as my hat indicates, and as recent shows have indicated. Bigfoot is very big for me, but I do love UFOs and I don't really talk about them enough. And I wanted to just share a few Reddit stories I came across in my rabbit hole diving that I did a few weeks ago. I did a story about creepy Reddit stories a few episodes ago. I'll link to that below as well. And came across some really cool stories I thought I'd share with you guys and just give my thoughts on them and relate them to some of the stories I've talked about in the past, my own encounters, and maybe some of John's and other people I know, but just some really cool stories here. And again, take this all with a grain of salt. I don't know how true any of these are. Of course, there's some comments in these sections. People ask legitimate questions on Reddit, and it being the internet, there are some people on the internet apparently who don't take things very seriously and are trolls, and they just give asshole answers. And so it was kind of hard to kind of sift through some of these, and you might see them just when I share my screen. Just some of the stories that people share that are clearly not real. They're just being jerks about it. So, so let me share my screen here and we will get into some cool UFO stories. So this is a thread called Redditors Who've Had UFO Encounters, What Happened? So again, the first story here again, I saw a UFO flying around and couldn't identify it. Then I worked out what it was and it became an FO. Then it landed and it was just an O. So people are kind of jerks, but there are some really interesting stories on here. And I want to just read these for you and give you my thoughts. So this first one comes from Cromemako 83, 16 days ago. And this is what this person says. My girls and I saw something we couldn't tell what it was. Washington State on a partially cloudy day while hiking in and near a national park. It was large, bigger than a small plane. Plane is spelled wrong. White, silverish, and oval, stretched from exactly spherical. It moved silently. At first, I thought it was a glider or a blimp. It seemed almost perfectly smooth / symmetrical on further observation. It went into a valley and seemingly never came out again. We tried to go where we thought it may have landed. Nothing was there. To be fair, it took us quite a while to get to the valley on foot. It's very possible it just went to the other end of the valley, which the mountain ridges prevented us from seeing. Wish I had my binoculars that day. Don't know what it was. So this one, just on reading this one, it sounds almost like those Tic Tac objects that the U.S. Navy had videoed recently and released to the public, and they just looked like a Tic Tac. It's kind of that oval, very smooth, looked like a Tic Tac, little candy Tic Tac. So that was an interesting story, Washington State. So let us continue. This one from Range Ghost, also 16 days ago. A lot of these are from 16 days ago. I saw a white speck of light in the night sky that was moving and watched it for a few minutes. Thought I was looking at a plane or satellite until it stopped and reversed. This was a few years before the modern commercial drone fad began, but I wouldn't rule out something military related. This one is interesting to me for a few reasons. There was one, I didn't do a podcast on it. I want to see if I can get Dustin and Josh on to talk about it. We had seen something up at Fawn Lake last summer, a little over a year ago, probably last June, and a little under a year ago. Last June up at Fawn Lake, we saw a purple light. And again, it looked like it may have been a plane or a satellite, but it moved way too fast and it was clearly purple. Then it turned white and it just kind of shot off. But this also reminds me of a story that my friend John told on the podcast a few episodes back when we were talking about Bantam Lake. Again, I will link to that in the comments below. But we discussed the same thing, that it kind of acted like a drone, but when we saw when he saw what he saw, and we saw something as well. We saw a red light. He saw some lights kind of dancing in the sky, and we were discussing, could they have been drones? And for us as well, it was the same thing. It was sort of back when, before drones were really commercially available. It could have been military. I don't know why the military would be flying drones over a family campground, but that is a much more logical explanation than alien spacecraft from another world or another dimension. But reading this story just made me think of that, because it's very simple. It's just a speck of light. You see these lights in the sky, and then it does something that a plane or a known aircraft can't really do. And drones, usually drones, you can hear them. They have propellers. They have they're just fairly easily identifiable if it's quiet enough. And if it's in the city, you may not be able to hear it, but if it's in the city, other people are seeing this UFO. So interesting story. So let's move on down this thread. Space Chainsaw 810 says, not my story, but my wife's middle school teacher in Mexico. The teacher was with a group of her 3 friends driving from, I believe, Tijuana to Mexicali. To get there, they passed through a very curvy downhill grade called La Rumarosa. Sorry, my Spanish is a little bit rusty. La Rumarosa. And the surrounding terrain is rocky cliffs and desert as they descend. They start to descend and see a very bright light coming towards them. They think is a semi-truck with their high beams on, but the light gets brighter and brighter until it consumes them. They all wake up hours later at the bottom of the grade on the side of the road unharmed, but they all had strange needle marks on their upper forearms. So this is a story. It sounds very sort of stereotypical. A lot of stories about this, about people driving late at night. They see lights. They have missing time. They wake up. I mean, the Betty and Barney Hill case comes to mind immediately. There are some other stories that are very similar. So interesting. And again, smart ass comments here. I recommend to check for missing organs. I don't know, but my ass hurts. Probe. It's always interesting to me when these things happen. I don't know why people would make up a story like this. It's less sensational than saying, yeah, I saw a UFO. They're just kind of saying, we saw a light, we woke up, had weird marks in our arms. Again, doesn't mean it was an alien spaceship, doesn't mean this actually even happened. It's a story, from a story from someone else. So it's kind of a third-hand story here. But thought it was interesting. Just because it does sound like so many other stories out there. And again, that doesn't mean it's true. Somebody could have heard this and just attributed this story. There's a lot of skepticism about how things kind of get out into the culture, and you hear a story and then something similar happens to you, or you attribute it to a friend or my wife's teacher or my brother's cousin's former college roommate sort of thing. So interesting that. And I will continue here. So my cats are cool. No, they're not. Cats are never cool. Sorry to anybody who has cats. I'm not a cat fan. On Christmas night, I was riding with my FIL, father-in-law, and wife home from a Christmas party. I saw what looked like a street lamp hovering just above trees and suburban homes. I was mesmerized by this thing because it looked so out of place. The size was bigger than a lamp and hung higher than any other lamp, but it was night, so I wasn't sure if it was a street lamp or not. As I watched this thing, it went from a large hovering light to zooming off like a shooting star and disappearing. It was shocking the speed it moved, considering it was just hovering in one place. I was so shocked and confused, I decided I wasn't going to say anything. My wife turns around and asks, "Did you see that thing?" I was so happy she saw it because I wasn't sure if I believed myself. Her and I still talk about it to this day, and both don't really know what it was. So again, interesting story. They're seeing something. They're clearly not initially thinking this is a UFO or this is a spaceship or this is anything weird. It's just, oh, there's like a new light or a new street lamp. And then it zooms off very fast from what it sounds like a shooting star, just very quickly, not like a plane. I mean, even the fastest planes that fly over us these days, we can kind of hear them coming. You see them going. They go very fast, but they're not like shooting star fast. So interesting. And someone else here, Dr. Renee Belloc says, me and my old man experienced something similar. Wild. Uh, Anyone who's seen a bird but couldn't identify it has encountered, I don't know what that means, that comment. So another one was sitting outside on a couch at a club with a friend on acid. I'm not going to take stories like that seriously. I'm sorry, but you're admitting that you're on hallucinogenic drugs. And I normally don't go for the drug thing when someone says they saw Bigfoot um, or this stuff. Were you drunk? Were you on, smoking weed? Those are drugs that, or substances that aren't really going to make you hallucinate, stuff like that. But you're on acid, you might see some weird lights and things like that. So again, some weird, funny comments that people feel the need to post in these things. Slipping Away One writes, my family has a second home on a lake in North Georgia for 50 years. As a teen, I was on the community dock around 10 on a Friday night with a bunch of friends. There's hilly terrain, and when planes fly over, there's an echo. That night, an orb appeared in the sky and darted at sharp angles for a good minute, then took off in a straight line and disappeared. Not a sound, no echo. No one said a word, but stared at each other. We left immediately, not saying a word to one another. Again, just people out, not necessarily looking for UFOs and seeing things. And like I said, certain things will make sounds. Planes make sounds. The thing that we saw at Fawn Lake that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, planes out in the Adirondacks, when you're out there in the middle of nowhere and a plane goes overhead, it doesn't matter how high up it is, you can usually hear a pin drop at night. And this night there were no crickets or anything really going on, no spring peepers. It was a little late for that, so it was a very quiet night. And we had heard planes going even over during the day when there's people there. There's people out on the lake fishing and talking and birds chirping. And even when a plane is very high up, you can hear the drone of the engines. And we didn't hear anything. So it's interesting that this person mentions that as well, that they're just familiar with planes flying over, and there's a plane, there's the echo. Here's a plane, there's an echo. And then they see these weird orbs darting at sharp angles, no sound. So just very interesting. And I think that's going to be it for this thread. Yeah. My cousin claims she was abducted with her husband. I blame her that they refused to ever contact Earth ever after meeting her crazy ass. So, you can't really discuss these things on the internet without someone chiming in. I'm even on Facebook pages where they're sort of just dedicated to this type of stuff, and people just kind of come in and want to ruin it for everybody else. And I'm all fine for dissenting opinions, but when people just kind of come in and someone's asking a serious question and wants to have a serious discussion, and people just throw crap in here, I don't like that type of stuff. So, but some of them are funny. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another thread, and this one is titled, So, What's Your UFO Sighting Story? Thought this one would be good. And again, first comment, of course. 3 days into an acid trip, I saw 3 ships hovering above my house. Thank you for your wonderful contribution to society. First real story. This is from Definitely Made That Up. I don't know if they're trying to tell us something here, but sounds like a legitimate story. Okay, so here it goes. I didn't believe until this night. I was driving home and saw what looked like a plane. It was a bright white light, and it was pitch black around me. It was open highway, straight and long. I kind of looked at it on and off and noticed it wasn't changing location as I did. It seemed to be moving the same speed I was. So I sped up and noticed it slowed down, meaning I was going faster than it at 80 miles an hour. Very strange. Helicopters and planes don't move that slow, but I was confused because it was high up, so I thought maybe some optical illusion. So I sped up more, 90, 100, up to 130. Again, open highway, night, clear road, straight. Kept looking, it fell behind me. I slowed, and out of nowhere, it shot by insanely fast and was gone. So helicopters can go slower than 80 miles an hour. That's kind of their point, to kind of hover and move fairly slowly. But for it to dart away like that is weird, and why would it be tracking this person's car? Sorry. And then someone else commented, I have a similar story with how slow I saw one going, and the weirdest part was this bright white light. The light just seemed so unnatural with how bright and focused it was. It gave off no halo or anything like a street light does, and it was just over the trees and going so slow, and I couldn't make out any form except this super intense white light. It was very weird. So And again, there's another comment under this one. I thought it was a plane far away until I read shot insanely fast. Incredible. So, yeah, people are going to try to debunk this. They're going to say maybe you saw a plane or a helicopter. And then these things tend to shoot off very quickly. And again, we were all familiar with how fast helicopters can go, or drones, or planes, or anything man made. I mean, even the fastest supersonic jets, if they fly overhead, it's fast, but it's not like a shooting star. It's not that instantaneous kind of zipping off. So interesting to read stuff like that. And then again, some more smart ass comments. I saw something in the sky I couldn't identify, then I forgot about it. Thank you. That's kind of pointless. So we'll move on to the next thread. Okay, so this next thread is those that have witnessed a UFO. What was your experience? So a lot of people on here just kind of want to get other people's experience. So this first story, ER Guitar, 2 months ago. I was on the roof of a hotel in rural Nepal with some friends. Out there, we could see the Milky Way in all its glory. We saw plenty of satellites out there. There was one light that was moving about as fast as the satellites, but much brighter. That light made an instantaneous 90-degree turn and then disappeared. There was no curve in that turn at all. I could have held the corner of a sheet of paper up to it. It was that sharp of a turn. There is no air or spacecraft that we know of capable of that maneuver, not to mention the G-force that would have been experienced by anyone on board. So there you in my UFO story. Someone comments that kind of thing is often attributed to a firefly and lack of perspective. Again, that could be the case. You know, sometimes you have bugs that are kind of up high around the tree line, or just high enough up where perspective can throw you off, you know. And it's one of those things where if you stare at a star long enough, it's going to start moving. Just your brain can't really look at a stationary object like that too long. If you're staring at it and focusing on it, the star will just kind of start to quiver and move, and it looks like it's moving. So you got to be real careful about this stuff. But the right angle is interesting. And again, it sounds like they're looking at this initially as a satellite. They thought it was a satellite, which if you've seen satellites, you're kind of familiar with them. So that seems to be very high up for a bug. And bugs don't typically go in those straight lines and then turn at a right angle. They're usually a little bit more erratic, and especially that high up, the wind is going to be buffeting them. So just interesting. Doesn't mean it's not a bug, but thought that was an interesting story. This is a shorter one. Best neighborhood 784. The internet wasn't working. Then my sister and mom tell me to look at the sky. We saw a big circle of lights spinning, got bright, got smaller, then disappeared. Once they were gone, the internet came back. So again, a typical sort of story about when these things appear. Electricity kind of goes haywire. Radio signals go haywire. Cars will turn off. You see this a lot in some of the older flying saucer horror movies from the 50s of cars dying and watches stopping and things like that. I have some stories in my family like that. I'm hoping to get to interview my dad about those from his cousins who have some stories like this of equipment stopping working when these things are around, whatever they are. So I just thought that was interesting, and hopefully I have those stories for you guys soon. Next story, Catherine Constance, 2 months ago. I was a little kid at home with my mom, and we were gazing out a window into our cul-de-sac. I think there were a lot of stars out that night. Maybe we had even seen a couple shooting stars. I don't remember, but it was dark, and we were looking out a window that overlooked the circle. Cul-de-sac is a dead-end street that kind of has a circle at the end, and cars can turn around. Instead of in New York City, there's really no cul-de-sacs. A dead end is just the street just ends, and you got to kind of do like a K-turn to get out. But nicer neighborhoods have cul-de-sacs where you can kind of just turn around. There was suddenly a big red flash in the sky above the cul-de-sac, and then a red spark flare-like thing slowly fell to the middle of the circle. We both saw it and were confused, and a few minutes later, we went out to investigate and couldn't find anything. I'm sure there's a boring explanation for what it was, but it reminds me an unidentified flying, floating, falling, actually object to us this day. This one reminds me of the black triangle thing I saw in Brooklyn. I watched it for about 45 minutes. At one point during my time watching it, it looked like little sparkles fell out from under it, and it was distant. I mean, this was what I was looking at, seemed to be miles away, probably 3, 4, maybe 5 miles away. It definitely looked like it was. I was in Bay Ridge. This looked like it may have been out over Staten Island. Uh, and sparkly things fell out of it. The things I saw were maybe more of a white sparkle. She's saying red spark flare. Um, Slowly fell to the middle of the circle. So this thing was lower to the ground than what I saw. Whatever I saw was high up in the air, and little sparkles fell out of it. And she's seeing little sparks or flares come out of this. So I thought that was interesting just because it kind of lines up with what I saw, and the sparks or sparkles floating down from an object. That's not something I've read a lot in the literature. So just interesting to me because it kind of gels with something I saw. You can always tell the jerks in these comment sections. I saw an object flying that I could not identify. Saw something flying, couldn't identify it. It was either a Boeing 747 or an Airbus A380, but I just couldn't say for certain. So the short ones are usually, I don't even read them because they're usually just people trolling. So we'll get to the next real story. Real. Need to Hide Me writes, driving back home from work and saw 3 lights in a triangle formation sitting stationary in the sky. 2 of the lights then slowly moved to make a more acute triangle. No blinking lights or anything. Then literally in the seconds to look back down at the road to make sure I'm not swerving and look back up, they were gone. 3 days later, around the same area of highway I was on, a single light shot from one end of the sky to the other in about a second, leaving a wavy trail that radiated for 3 seconds or so. Okay, so the second part of this could have been a shooting star. It sounds like that. It just sounds like it shot and left a trail. I mean, that sounds very much like a shooting star or a meteor. The first part here, this is interesting to me. No blinking lights. I mean, most commercial aircraft need running lights, aviation lights, navigation lights. They have blinking lights on them. And then literally in the seconds to look back down at the road to make sure I'm not swerving and look back up, they were gone. That was my experience with my object that I saw, the black triangle. A lot of people say they watch them shoot off. Mine didn't do that. I watched it for 45 or so minutes, maybe a little bit longer, and looked down at my clock to see what time it was because I was kind of timing this, and looked back up and it was gone. So it was that quick second just to kind of look down, look back up. It was gone. I didn't see it shoot off, so I don't know if it did shoot off or it just faded, but just in the quick enough time, in that time, it quickly just disappeared. So that resonated with me as well. So this next story comes from backup KDC 6794. The first time when I was around 10 or 11 and happened to look out the window and saw a brown cigar-shaped craft in the sky and a white craft that almost resembled a computer cursor. I was watching them for a minute, and the cursor object shot off high into the sky off at an incredible speed, and then I couldn't see the cigar craft anywhere. The second time I saw a UFO was a few years later, and when I was in the car with my parents, and I looked out of the window and saw a spherical light in the sky. I think what I saw that day was probably Venus or another planet, but I can't explain the first 2 UFOs I saw. So another interesting story. He kind of debunks his second one. He says, it was probably Venus. Sounds like maybe he was still a kid. A few years later, so maybe in his mid-teens. The first story, a brown cigar-shaped craft. That's weird because usually you hear these things are silver or metallic. You hear black a lot, so maybe what he saw was black, and he's just seeing it as brown. Maybe the sun shining on it. A craft that resembled a computer cursor, so triangle, or maybe a triangle with a little tail to it, because the cursors are like, they can be arrow shaped and then just have a little tail on them. So kind of like the profile of a super star destroyer from Star Wars, which thankfully it wasn't, because we'd be in trouble. So yeah, interesting that he saw a darker craft. Usually it's metallic or black, so brown is interesting, but he was young, and maybe that's just kind of how his brain perceived it at the time. So last story from this thread comes from read comment backwards, which I'm not going to do. It was one of those nights where the moon gave it a little light. Both my siblings and dad saw a huge rectangular shape, pitch black, pass by overhead without making a sound. 3 lights on each corner of the object. My dad was over this weekend, and he still insists he has seen several other times to this day. I don't really believe in the paranormal, and there's always an explanation. However, this one still baffles me. So again, this is sounds like a person who doesn't really believe, but believes their father, and maybe knows that their father wouldn't make things up and wouldn't be prone to flights of fancy. This reminds me of the triangles that pass over, and people sort of say it kind of blocks out the stars. So they can only see three lights. They see a triangle shape of lights, but in between the lights, the stars aren't there. And it doesn't mean that there's a structure there. It could just mean that the lights are washing out our vision and we can't see the little pinpricks of stars in between these big bright lights. But there are other times where people say the lights weren't that bright, but you can clearly see they were attached to a craft and there was a mass between the lights, clearly a structure or a craft that was blocking out the lights. And it almost sounds like that's what this person is saying here, that there was a rectangular shape, it was pitch black, and it passed by overhead without making a sound. And that's another thing. People say that these things don't make a sound, and skeptics will say it was a blimp, or blimps make sounds. I've had blimps over my house, and they're not as maybe loud as airplanes, but they make sound. They need to maneuver. They will make sounds. So very interesting. And with that, we're going to move on to the next thread. Okay, so this one is tagged serious. So again, people realize that internet trolls are going to come in and try to be funny. Comedy is hard. Trust me, I know. And they really just want serious answers and serious discussion, which I appreciate. But this one is serious. Members of the U.S. military, what is your experience with UFOs? And this one doesn't really have a whole heck of a lot going on in it, but I will read some of these because they're interesting. So the first one I'm going to read, Bundy's Playbook, I guess a Married with Children reference, Al Bundy. Avid believer here, ghosts and aliens. I will be joining the Air Force next year or so. I'll post if I find anything on my account. Friend of mine is Army. He was at base. It was the dead of night at the time. It was then that one of the boys pointed out something in the sky. My friend looked up, told me they were seeing a bunch of lights in a circular formation. Thing was huge, too. What I find weird is none of the soldiers caught anything on radars, whatever they use. I get it could have been a drone or a military test, but it's weird that you could see the lights form a circle, and he could swear he saw the circular shape of a craft with the lights on, too. But it was dark, and UFOs are usually seen as black with lights. I'm not saying this is a UFO, but I believe it wasn't exactly supposed to be there at the very least. So again, a secondhand story, but similar in that there's a shape of lights, whether it's rectangle, triangle, this one's a circle, but seem to block out the sky behind it. It's military. They didn't seem to know what it was. You hear a lot of these stories about things over military bases. The Rendlesham incident comes to mind. If you don't know what that is, Google that. I'll put a link below. Very interesting story. Lots of probably stuff about it that isn't true, but I think the heart of the matter is really interesting and worth checking out. The Rendlesham Forest incident. And then somebody else comments, it's a short one, but I don't know what he's trying to say here. Maybe he can't say too much. Vampire of Nazareth says, not US or not us. I don't know if he's trying to say not us. Got scanned by a sentient machine once. No organics, just machines. So very cryptic. I don't know if he's trying to say they're not us, they're not human, and that he's in the military and got scanned by something, and somehow he knows there was nothing organic in this craft and he was just scanned by it. Someone else, no, never saw one, have seen some top secret stuff before, though. It's not as interesting as you would think. And again, there's different levels of top secret. There's not everybody has access to everything. Just because you see one thing that's top secret doesn't mean you've now seen everything top secret. So I'm not going to give that one too much credence, but this one is interesting. He does believe, and he's got a friend who's in the Army who saw something, circle of lights. So very interesting. And again, he's saying, I'm not saying this is UFO, but UFO just means unidentified. So who knows what it is? Doesn't mean it's alien. It could be military, it could be foreign governments, could be just something natural we don't understand yet, but they're all very interesting to me nonetheless. Okay, so our last thread is another one that's tagged serious. So again, someone who doesn't want the trolls in here, just wants like real people telling real stories, whether they're true or not, but he wants real. Serious discussion. UFO encounters. What's your story? So this one, there's two stories in here, and they're both interesting to me, and I'll get into that in a minute. So I'll start with the first story. Mysterious Roman writes, I walked into an apartment complex zone for a cigarette and looked above me to check the sky and saw 3 or 4 orbs of red light moving slowly in the parameter. I guess he means perimeter. Didn't look like any drone I've seen. No planes or noise, just the lights moving slowly around each other. Brushed it off and walked to my destination. Could have been anything. This one, it's the orbs again. And I'm not talking about ghost hunting orbs when you go into your attic and kick up a bunch of dust and take a picture with a digital camera and a flash and there's, oh, look, there's a bunch of orbs. I'm talking about things that people see in the moment with their eyes that are seemingly self-illuminated. They're much smaller than UFOs or flying saucers or craft. They seem to be small balls of light, little orbs. But this also does sound like what John saw when we were up at Bantam Lake. He says that, he saw maybe 4 or 5 orbs of light dancing around each other. And this guy says just the lights moving slowly around each other. So very strange. Again, could have been bugs. John doesn't believe what he saw were bugs. We were thinking drones. Again, it was in the probably early 90s, early to mid 90s when John had his experience. I don't know when this guy had his experience, but when it's before drones were commercially available, why would military be testing these at night over a family campground? Just strange. Or an apartment complex. This guy's in the city, and I've seen some orbs in the city. My father has seen some orbs in the city. So we don't know what they are. They're weird. We're not saying they're UFOs or paranormal. I mean, it could be ball lightning, could be any number of things, but they seem to move intelligently. For my last story about Reddit stories, I did one story about an orb in the woods, and I've had some people on my Facebook page comment that they've seen similar things, tennis ball size or in that size range, like not a huge craft that would have human-sized beings in them, just small little orbs of light that move and seem to be sentient and intelligent and move around on their own, and then just zip off and they're gone. And what were they? Who knows? So here is the last story that I'm going to talk about today. Officer Panther writes, when I was younger, I recall seeing these white orb-like lights moving oddly through the night sky. I remember first thinking it was a plane or something, but there were 6 or 7 of them, and they appeared to move independently of each other. Some would move really fast, while others seemed to hover. I never knew what it ever was. My mom and I both seen them from our front yard. So again, you have somebody talking about these orbs. The whole dancing around each other trope seems to be here as well. Some were moving faster than others. A number of them. This first story says 3 or 4. This one says 6 or 7. Again, I think John said 4 or 5. So you have these multiple objects moving around each other. They don't seem to be moving in formation. It's not a bunch of planes moving. It's just weird. Just orbs that moving through the night sky. And you will hear different colors. The one color I hear the most is like an amber orangish or like a deep yellow, just that amber color. But I've heard white, I've heard blue, I've heard red. But the amber orange is the one that seems to be the most common from what I've heard, from what other people have told me. From what I saw was like an amber orange. I saw 2 lights. I saw 2 like little orbs kind of moving away from someone's upstairs window, which was kind of freaky, and don't know what they were, but like these 2 orange orbs, just they seemed to be still. And I looked at them, and kind of as I made contact with them, because I saw them out of the corner of my eye, and as I looked directly at them, they kind of zipped off and they were gone, just like real fast. But they were small, and they seemed to be like almost like they were looking in this second floor window of this house. So very freaky. And but I always find these stories interesting, especially these orbs, especially when they're not in the woods. I mean, the woods, you can make a case for ball lightning. You can make a case for St. Elmo's fire, vegetation decaying and swamp gas and all that other stuff that people like to use to debunk things. And again, I could kind of see that in the woods, in the city, by apartments and houses, and people just seeing this in highly populated areas. It's a little bit weirder to me. Again, it could be ball lightning. There's a lot of electricity, a lot of cell phone signals and radio signals, and all sorts of weird stuff we have going on in the city that's not weird. It's just electrical and could be creating these little bits of ball lightning. So again, there could be very rational explanations for these things, but what they are, I'm not sure. So I thought these were cool stories. Just wanted to share them with you and just relate them back to some of my stories. If you guys have a story about orbs or UFOs or anything strange, spooky, could be Bigfoot, could be ghosts, could be anything under the sun that is just unexplained and weird, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to give us a subscribe. It really helps the channel. Like, shoot your comments down below. We love hearing from you guys and interacting with you guys. If you're listening on a podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, please leave us a review. We've had some people review us poorly because of one particular show we did where we didn't 100% agree with somebody they really are big fans of, and they've left us some nasty reviews. So if you're listening on a podcast platform and you like the show, I'm not even asking for a 5-star review. Just give me what you think I deserve. If you think I deserve 3 stars, give me 3 stars. But any reviews help. Any feedback always helps. So leave a comment, give us a review. Of course, we'd love 5 stars if you love what we're doing, but 4 stars if you think we could do better. And I say we because I have co-hosts who come on and help me often, Josh and Scott and John, and they're not really guests, they're co-hosts. And I love talking to them and hope to have them back on again soon. But again, if you have a story, jason@oddanduntold.com. And if you're listening or watching, please give us a like, comment, a subscribe, a review. Really appreciate it. It will really help the channel. And until next week, everybody, rock and roll.
Moonlight glowing, it fades on me and you, casting dancing shadows